Good morning. It's great to be back. Well, it's been a great week. It's been a little hot. The fans help out, don't they? You know, I was so grateful when I found out that the high would be in the 70s today. I thought, oh, praise God. So hot up here. But a lot of great things have been going on. Of course, Selena's getting baptized today. And that's just flat exciting. And she's got a great story to tell. You got to get to know her. She's awesome and amazing. For me, I feel so much better. I had my surgery 4.5 weeks ago. There's still weird things going on in here. I don't get it. You know, I feel this pain here and that, and, you know, aliens in there or something. Doctor says, yeah, it's going to happen. You know, it's you're healing in there, and weird things are going to happen. Just accept it. I'm like, okay, all right, I'll do that. You know, a few weeks ago, I did like a 20-minute part for the sermon. That was a mistake. Yeah, I learned my lesson. Yeah, God does that for you, so you'll wake up. But you know, there's this one side of you that you want to go. You don't want to be sick anymore. You're just laying around. You're just kind of in pain, and it's no fun. You can only pray for so long, right? Is that right? You can only read so much. Netflix doesn't have, you know, there's not good stuff on there. So, but then there's the other side of you that kind of likes, you know, being served. You know, you're laying there. Can you get that? You know, there's that one side of you that loves that attention. I remember when I was a kid, my brothers and I have 3 brothers, we got chickenpox. And we all spread it among each other, of course. And we were all sick at the same time. And I can remember my mother in the morning, you know, and you try to drag this on as long. You don't want to go back to school. So you try to drag this thing on as long as possible, right? And, you know, my mom come up there, make sure we're okay and give us stuff. And then she leaves, and then we're just, you know, throwing pillows at each other and all that kind of stuff. Then she comes back up, and we're playing the game. Am I alone in this? I mean, you never did that? Perfect children. Okay. But, you know, when I was sick, I had a lot to think about and a lot to pray about. And I've got like 3 or 4 sermons ready to go. And so next few weeks, there are a lot of insights that I learned from all this. All right. And today, we're going to concentrate on the healing process. The title lesson is Powerful Spiritual Healing. And it's amazing how many parallels there are from physical healing and spiritual healing. And as you look at society, there's a lot of spiritual healing that needs to be done. There is a lot of guilt out there that people feel. They don't know how to deal with it, and they have to harden their hearts. And there's a lot of depression because people don't know how to deal with it. There's a lot of fear, and all these things are spiritual issues. There's things that have been said, and we've done damage to other people in our life, and we don't know how to deal with it. And Jesus says, listen, I can give you the hope you need, that you don't have to stay where you're at. And it's amazing to me to see the damage just in Milwaukee. It is scary to hear about all the shootings, people dying. This week alone, there was a little 5-year-old girl who got shot, killed. She was in a car. And I don't know about you, but after a while, you hear those things so much that doesn't hit you like it ought to. And there can be a hardening of hearts. And so there's got to be something that keep our heart soft, moldable, and not allow the world to harden our hearts. Can you relate with all this? Let's go to Ephesians chapter 4. Point number 1, a hardening of hearts. Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 17. Paul is writing to the church in Ephesus here. And he says, so I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more. Wow, that's pretty bleak, but it's a reality. And I don't know about you, I remember these days where there was a hardening of heart and really looking for some sort of peace in my heart or some sort of freedom, something to make me happy. Maybe it's turning to drugs or drinking or all that kind of stuff. But he says here, don't live like the Gentiles do. Now he's challenging Christians. He says, don't go back to this stuff. It's not good. And he makes it bleak because it is bleak. And he says, hey, their thinking is futile. He says they're darkened in their understanding, ignorance due to the hardening of their hearts. And they have lost all sensitivity. And it just kind of paints a picture of what's out there. Can you imagine going back out there? I certainly can't. Why would I want to do that? But sometimes we can lose sensitivity. And we can forget how bad our lives were because we love sin. We love to indulge. We love to give in to the things that harm us. Now, the thing is, if you're going to play, all right, you're going to pay. And there's a reality to it. He's just saying, don't be like the world. Why play with fire? And yet people fall away from God, and they do so much damage to themselves. And every time I think about somebody who decides, hey, I'm going to leave because of this or that or whatever, my heart goes out to them because I'm thinking, you don't know what you're doing. I've been doing this for 7 years. I've seen it. It never goes good. When somebody chooses the world over God, it never goes good. You got to harden your heart to do it. The word futile. He says, your thinking is futile. The word is ineffective and useless. And see, this is what happens. I remember in the 60s, they used to have all these cigarette commercials. And they try to make it look cool. And they had the Marlboro Man. You guys remember that? Dun, 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 dun. No? All right, the Marlboro Man. Now, Victor knows it because in other countries, they still have those commercials, like in Mexico. Why? Because they try to sell cigarettes. Well, it was banned in the United States because they came to understand the damage that it does to people. Last year, Barbara and I were in Dubai, okay? And they would have these cigarette cartons that you'd look at or at the packs, and right on the front, it says causes cancer, and it'll show somebody with part of their face missing or a great big growth or something. And it's like, oh my gosh. But they're trying to shock people into the reality of what are you doing? But the tendency is we lose all sensitivity. And you think about the TV commercials today. Have you seen them? With the woman with half the face missing and the guy not being able to breathe and all those. They're trying to shock us into reality. And then what's amazing is you see doctors smoking. And you're like, what is with that? You're just working on these guys. You see the x-rays and like, yeah, that's really bad. It's like, what are you thinking? And we can be like that spiritually. Darkened in their understanding. What does that mean? They rationalize sin in their mind. I'm okay. It's just a little bit. And we convince ourselves by pointing at the world and comparing. At least I'm not as bad as that person. And that's how we slowly die on the vine. Talks about losing all sensitivity. You know, as you talk to people who have certain illnesses, you hear a lot more about people who struggle with, you know, different diseases that cause numbing in the hands and the feet. You know of anybody like that? Yeah. And what happens is they can smash their foot and not know it. And it happens for a number of illnesses. And you realize, wow, that's what the world does to us. We can do damage to parts of our body and not even know it because we're so hard and not realize how dangerous it is of what I'm doing. And then we can decide to look at only the things we want to see. Because the truth is too painful. And I'll avoid talking to this person or that person because they make me feel bad. Well, are they bringing out the truth? Or would you rather just suffer in your stuff? Or are you going to appreciate the love that somebody has enough to say something? And see, we got to love and not be afraid of conflict. We got to continue to do that. And in a lot of ways, we flirt with disaster on a lower level than the world. And it happens. You can be at work and you're starting to flirt with a coworker. Oh, well, it's not, you know, no, you're flirting with disaster. You're messing up. You're playing with fire. You ignore certain signs. There's a brother who told me recently that he parked his car in a place where it says no parking. And he was only gone for about 5 minutes, came back, and his car was towed away. Towed away. And then all the rationales came out. Well, I always do that, and I never get a ticket there. And it was only 5 minutes. But the bill was like, I don't know, hundreds of dollars. Of course. But the cool thing is, he said, I learned my lesson. That's what's cool. But, you know, we think about what does God have to do to get us to learn our lesson? And how are we going to get bitten by the world? Well, it's just a white lie. It's not that big of a deal. It's not really stealing. They won't miss it. They got so many of those. You know, about 3/4 of a year ago, I shared in a sermon, I don't know if you guys remember this, where I went in for a blood test. And the nurse said to me, did you get your prostate checked? She says, I don't know why you men can't get your prostate checked. You check your oil all the time. What's the deal with that? And, you know, after talking, I found out her husband died because of that. And guess what? Got my prostate checked, and I had cancer. But see, the thing is, do we take heed to when people bring things up? The first thing you think of when they tell you got cancer is denial. No, that can't be. I don't feel anything. I feel fine. I'm no more tired than usual. I can do this, I can do that. And they're like, no, you have it. And it's the same way with sin. We try to deny sin. We try to rationalize it away. And then what we try to do is we try to say, I don't need to deal with it. We try to harden our hearts to it. Why? Because number one, hey, I'm going to go under the knife. That's not going to be fun. That's going to be painful. And how much is this going to cost? And, fill in the blank. And then, how long will I live if I do nothing about it? Can you imagine asking that? And he said, well, you'd probably live about 10 years. 10 years. But you got to think about all the stuff that's going to happen in the last few years and all that kind of thing. And there's no promises. Something will go wrong. And it's like, man, do I want to do this? Well, what's the end result? It's the futility of thinking, darkened in your understanding. You have cancer. What's going to wake you up? And we get spiritual cancer. And we play with it. We don't deal with sin. We just let it hover in our hearts until it grows slowly and chokes you out. And then it's like, hey, are you sure? Should we get a second opinion? He's like, well, we've had all these doctors look at you. Yeah, you got it. And still trying to fight that in my mind. Your prostate is 3/4 full of cancer. Okay. People do this spiritually. This is going to be painful. I don't want to go under the knife. I don't want to really dig down and find out what's going on in here. I don't want to look at my past. I don't want to think about how I've been scarred so I can be healed. I don't want to talk about these things. I've shelved it. I put it on the, side. I don't want to think about it. You'd rather live with this guilt. You'd rather live with this hate that's brewing in your heart towards this person. And we think we can get away with it, but it's not going to go away. Are you sure I have this sin? Well, here's your pattern. What do you think? Well, let's pull somebody else in. Okay, what do you think? Well, I don't want you to pull anyone. Well, then you don't want to know. It's kind of quiet in here. How long will you go to the point of no return? When they were checking on me, they said, we can let this go, but there's no, proof that it hasn't gone further. It could be in your lymph nodes. It could be here, but we'll check. But we won't know until after the surgery. And for us spiritually, how long do you let something go? Well, that's foolish. You're playing with fire. For us, it's just death here. Spiritually, it's death eternally. That's biblical. That's what the Bible says. A lot of people don't want to even look in the Bible because they're afraid of what it's going to tell them about their own hearts. They want to claim ignorance. They want to be in denial. Point number 2, wake up. Some point there's got to be a reality check. You just got to wake up. And it's like I was talking about those commercials for smoking. What's going to get you to the point where you say, okay, this is a big deal. I got to think about this. Look in Ephesians 5, starting in verse 1. Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a man as an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things, God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of the light, for the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything everything exposed by the light becomes visible. For it is light that makes everything visible. This is why it is said, "Wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." Be careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Wow, that's a pretty intense little passage right there. I think Paul was trying to make a point. He's trying to say, wake up. There's a reality check here. He begins by saying, imitate God. Wow, that's a high calling right there. But in our minds, do we even think about being holy? We're so polluted by the world that we think, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus be thinking here? I super appreciate what Alexis said today. That's awesome. That's leadership material right there. That you can say, okay, I'm in a bad situation on a heart level. I need to deal with this now. And realizing if you don't, it's going to become worse. He goes through this whole list of sins, but he says live a life of love, just as God is. And he goes through this list of sin. Sexual immorality. What else does he say? Greed, obscenity, foolish talk. He goes on and on and on. And he gives us a warning. He says, hey, nobody who lives like this is going to make it to heaven. Now, I didn't write this. Okay, don't, throw rocks at me. Read it. You got an issue with it, you got an issue with God. But he's saying you're not going to make it if you live like this. He's writing to Christians. Okay. Well, surely it can't be that bad. But everybody does this. I know ministers who do this. I know my family does it. I know this. He says, let no one deceive you with empty words. And that's what the world will do. It will deceive you to tell you you're okay. And that's why he says, no, wake up. You got to wake up. He says, because God's wrath is going to come upon you. We could rip this page out. Would that help? But no. Verse 10, he says, find out what pleases the Lord. Hey, doesn't say find out what pleases your minister. Find out what pleases your wife, your kids, your boss. Find out what pleases the Lord. Hey, you please God, that's all it takes. And this is what he says you got to do. He says, wake up. He says, why? He says, you make the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Isn't that true? There's a lot of evil out there. It is shocking. And you hear some of these stories and you think, how did that person get to that point where they can just shoot someone like that? Rape someone like that. They have that thing on Ted Bundy. And it's like, wow, this guy was super deceitful. Wow. And see, people practice deceit. And the reason why people lie and they're so hardened is they deceive themselves. That's a scary place to be. That was me. It took a lot for people to get to see my sin of deceit. And they point out things to me, and I'd say, no, no. And they'd get me to see my pattern. And I'd still rationalize it away. And they're like, dude, you're deceiving yourself. And I had to say, okay, I got to listen. I got to wake up. I got to figure out what these guys are trying to say to me, because the days are evil. I don't want to play with fire. He says, don't be foolish. Understand what the Lord's will is. You know, there's a lot of churches out there. And you can bounce around until you find one that's going to teach you what you want to hear. One that's going to make you feel good. That'll help you rationalize sin. And there's a lot of people who've actually just started up their own church. I don't like it. I'll just do my own. Versus, no, I need to get unified. All right? And I need people in my life to call me higher. I need people to challenge me and love me enough to help me get out of this mess. It's funny, we sit down, we study the Bible with people, and usually what we do is we take a lot of time untangling their lives. Because there's so many things that financial, emotional, relationship damage, which is normal. But they need hope. At this point, a lot of people have given up. They quit. There's nothing out there for me. Yes, there is. But you got to wake up. The question is, do you want to get healed? You know, it's interesting how they did this surgery. You guys want to hear this? Okay, so bottom line, last thing I remember is they're bringing me into the room. I don't even remember seeing the room, okay? And what he told me they had to do is they had to take the bed and put it on end, where my head is down here. And the reason being is all my guts would slide further up this way. Then they'd fill me full of gas, bloat me. I'm glad I was sleeping. And that way they'd have a lot of room. Then I got 6 incisions, all right? I was in there from 11:30 to 6, and the actual surgery was like 4.5 hours. Now, when I came home, I thought, you know, and I have a friend who went through it. He said, you got to check it out on YouTube. So I said, okay, let me watch this. And I'm like, oh, I can't believe what they did to me. Wow. And I'm glad I didn't watch it before. Okay. And I said to the guy, how do you know how to do this stuff? I couldn't tell what was that thing and that thing. And they had a light in there, and they had the laser cutting things. And I was just like, wow, this is really weird. And see him pulling it out and all that. Brutal. And I said, how do you practice for this stuff? And he says, well, you got a lot of simulators, and you work on the simulator, and you have to do it, and you have to pour hours upon hours, and then you're with somebody else who teaches you how to do it. Am I right, Marlene? And they teach it. And I, anybody else going to be here? And he's like, yeah, there's another guy. He's older than I am. And I actually got to meet him, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that happened to me is when I was waking up, I wouldn't wake up. And they kept shaking me. And I'd be like, and they're like, wake up. She was yelling at me, wake up. And I can remember thinking, oh, this feels so good. Just let one more minute. And there's this machine that's going beep, beep, beep. And she goes, you hear that? That's because you're not breathing. And see, before they had to put a thing down my, to breathe. Because you quit breathing. And she said, you're not breathing. You got to wake up to breathe. And she would shake me. And I just remember one more minute. And I can always wake up later and thinking all these things in my mind. And it's just so comfortable to sleep. I feel so weak. And see, this is what we tell ourselves spiritually. Right? Somebody's trying to wake you up. But just give me another minute. I'm comfortable here. You're comfortable like that? And see, that's what happens to us spiritually. The thing that I thought about later is I am totally at the mercy of this guy. Totally. There's nothing I can do. And I am willingly allowing myself to let him do this. And it takes a lot of trust to do that. And remember, before going in, and you got to sign these papers. If anything goes wrong, And really, when it comes to spiritual healing, it's the same with God. You got to totally trust God. You got to put your heart into his hands. And because we struggle so much with a lack of trust, we fear giving our hearts again. There's a guy I got with this week. He got burned in a church, and he's like, nope, never again. Ain't going to happen. And I remember thinking, what are you going to do? You're going to stay where you're at? And I asked him about his purpose. I don't have a purpose. And then he's like, I know I need to change these things. But it's so hard. Well, who's suffering more? The person who's staying hardened, alone, fearful, given into sin, or the person who trusts God and says, okay, it's time. I'm going to go there. And I'm going to allow people to help me to wake up. I don't even know where I am here. I think, too, the other thing I think about is just being alerted to danger. We don't see it as dangerous. We don't see sin, and we don't see the corruption that's happening in our hearts. But what's amazing is we do in our kids. And we've been getting a lot more kids in the church. All right. And it's always interesting to watch young parents. We got a little baby right there. All right. Now, here's what you got to realize how protective parents are. Because they are totally at your mercy. And kids totally trust you. You tell them to jump, they jump. But what happens if you let that kid, 3-year-old kid, you're not watching them for about a minute or so? What happens? They get into trouble fast. Now, if you got 3 kids, you're in trouble fast, okay? But here's the thing. There's that protective nature. That's how God feels about us. And eventually, you hope that they're going to grow up and learn. Don't do this. You slap their hand, and then they get older, and you got to convince them. And somewhere along the line, they've got to make their own decisions. And the question is, are we mature enough to make that decision? To say, enough's enough. I've played with fire long enough. It's time for me to, rather than being a part of the problem, is be a part of the solution. And that's what we got to become. I remember half a year ago in Milwaukee here, this actually went on national news. There was a bus driver driving along, and she saw a 2-year-old, 3-year-old kid walking down the sidewalk. And it was in January. It was like 10 degrees out. And the kid was in his slippers or her slippers, pulled the bus over, immediately ran over and grabbed the kid. And you imagine what the parents are feeling. Where's my kid? Finding out that it is walking long distance. It's a scary thing. The thing is, we need to be that bus driver for people. We got to be the one who is alarmed, who's alert, who's saying, hey, I got to do something about this. I got to change the situation. Look in John chapter 5. Now, this is a passage we look at often. Point number 3 is, do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? The other question is, what sin are you playing with? Pornography, greed, cowardice, laziness, gluttony, fill in the blank. Chapter 5, verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now, there is in Jerusalem near the Shape Gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he learned that he had been in this condition for a long time. He asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool while the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. You know, you look at the situation, and it's society. There's a lot of people who need curing, and a lot of people are spiritually disabled. And Jesus sees this one guy, 38 years. Now, if that were me, I'd find a way into the pool. If I really believed this thing was going to heal me, I'd get in there. I'd lay on the side, flip over, and I'd be in. Okay? But Jesus asks an interesting question. He says, "Do you want to get well?" Why would he say that? Well, some people don't want to get well. For this guy, it would mean that he would have no more excuses. He would have to get a job. He would have to have responsibility. He would have to live a normal life. But right now, I'm just laying here. I have a great excuse, and people pity me, and they give to me. And that's what a lot of us can do. We can be that way. Pity me. Feel bad for me. And that's what you can do when you're sick. You get surgery, it's easy to say, "Pity me. Help me." That kind of thing. But you can only pull that card for so long. And so a lot of people point to their problems. You ever been talking to somebody and all they do is they bring up all their problems? And it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? Do you want to get out of this mess? Do you want to get well? And he said, "Well, I tried, blah, blah, blah." And people will bring up all the things they've tried to do. All right, that's not what I asked. Do you want to get well? And if they say yes, then you give them direction, just like Jesus. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And the mat was a symbol of his security. This was my home. And he said, "Deal with the mat. Get out of here." And sometimes we become very comfortable in our sin. Even though it's ruined our life and it's wasted things away in our heart, we can get very comfortable. And one of the big reasons is fear. We're afraid of what it might mean for us to change. You know, there's a book that I'd read many years ago called Competent to Counsel. And he dealt with a lot of people who had extreme mental issues. And there's this one woman, she's bipolar and so on and so forth. And after a few months, he realized, he said, you know, she's faking it. And he got her to believe that he knew she was faking it. Doesn't happen all the time, but she was faking it. And finally she admitted, "Yeah, I'm faking it." Why? She said, "Well, I got pregnant and I didn't want to face my parents. And I realized if I act crazy, it'll deflect the issue and people will pity me." And see, a lot of people will do that to not really deal with the real issues. We can do that on a spiritual level. The question is, do you want to get healed? Look in Luke 5. Luke chapter 5. Verse 27. Okay, now the Pharisees didn't like Jesus. A lot of them hated him. Why? Because not only was he helping other people, he was pointing out their serious issues. And there's an issue that comes up. Verse 27. This is after this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. Follow me, Jesus said to him, and Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with him. But the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, who belonged to their sect, complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." You know, you look at this, and the Pharisees had an issue. Oh, they're unclean. What are you doing with those people? And Jesus is like, why would I hang with you when the problem's over here? Well, who's spiritually sick? We all are. And the Pharisees didn't see it, but the difference was these people knew it, and they were open to the help, whereas the Pharisees were not. Here's my question. Are you open to getting the help you need to deal with the issues that stop you from really loving God and loving other people? We're all spiritually sick until we're healed by Jesus. And then we need to constantly deal with sin in our hearts. You know, I appreciate so much Selena getting baptized here. Okay, now, Selena's been in and out of churches her whole life, okay? But the women got together, and we thought, okay, hey, she's just going to join the church, all right? But what happens is you get a lot of baggage in your heart. And Selena was totally humble. And she was like, hey, you know, I've never heard this before. I've never seen this before. And she came to the point where in her heart of hearts, she realized, I'm not right with God. And I applaud her heart. All right, you know, I think she's a little bit younger than me. But the longer you're living, the more sin you can get involved in. The more gunk you got in your heart. But for somebody who is older in life, to be able to be that humble is impressive. To be open to listening to a lot of the younger people in here, that's impressive. That's a person who wants to get well. We need to imitate her heart. That's got to be us. She's going to be this incredible addition to the group. I'm so fired up. I think about her all the time. Pray about her every day. But what a huge plus for us. And hopefully you could say the same about you. Do you inspire people with your change and your challenge? Or do you discourage people with your lifestyle? Do you want to get well? We will know. We will see it. It'll be obvious. People will talk about it. It's impressive. It's challenging and inspirational to watch people change. You know, Milwaukee needs a lot of healing, guys. We've had great growth in the church, but it's nowhere near what we need to be doing. Get the healing. Deal with the issues in your heart so you can be like Jesus and giving people direction for healing. The challenge for us is to be alarmed. Not only our own selves, but for others. You know, real quick, we're going to close here. Last week, Barb had a kidney stone. All right? And she came up to me right after the end of the Bible talk and said, hey, I'm in pain here. I'm going to go home. I'm like, okay. And she went home. And then Marlene came up to me and said, I think you need to go home and possibly take your wife in. I wasn't alarmed. And the problem is, I'm still dealing with my own stuff. And we can be like that. And so deal with our stuff, but deal with other people too. Somebody's in pain, go in there, engage, rescue. She ended up going to the emergency room and, praise God for pain medication. Completely healed. She's doing fine. She's back in the battle like that. She didn't take months to, I got to recuperate. No, she was right in the battle. And that, too, is praiseworthy. You know, I'm going to close with a challenge. Don't get inward focused. Get outward focused. The challenge for the week is to get involved. You hear something, you do something. You attack it. Let's get people healed. Make it your heart this week to rescue someone. Find out who needs help. It's everywhere. You don't have to look far. Be willing to engage, attack, and let's change Milwaukee. Amen?